All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the Assembly Committee on Housing and Homelessness. We are noticed today from 1 to 3 p.m. in the Assembly chambers. Let's go ahead and start with introductions from folks on the dais, and then we'll go to the phone.
Daniel Boland, Christopher Ronson,
Felix Rivera, and members on the phone.
Randy Schultz.
Susanna Brandt. Austin Davidson.
Thank you. And Mr. Perez-Redia is excused for today's meeting. Okay, so next on our agenda, we have initial audience participation. So we have one individual who signed up, Mr. Oliva. If you can come up, state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Without getting into what happened at the previous assembly meeting, I had testimony there to requested a public appearance to discuss that matter at the full assembly meeting. In particular, this awarding of $1.2 million to the Brother Francis Shelter without any review or documentation of their performance. They are not a good neighbor. They are not even a neighbor. They're not an asset to the neighborhood. Their track record has been terrible towards my business, and their attitude is one that they don't care what happens outside their facility. So they're on a truck route. It's a heavy industrial area. There's no crosswalks, and you awarded them another increase in the population of Wold area. The most difficult to handle population without consulting the Fairview Community Council, the local businessmen, or the adjacent property owner who has been heavily affected both in health, economic interference, quality of life, and the safety of what's going on. So their violations of conditional use, what I documented, they never get punished. That includes the cleanup route, which they, if you solicited their logs versus my photographs and documentation, you'll see they've done nothing. I hate to say it, they had a needle exchange, never informed us of that, and it's almost 1 million needles. You would think that you would document that, the return of the needles. The other thing is, the Catholic Church, this is a separation of church and state, and they have their own money from Bezos, and as I've said multiple times in the past, they have Bishop's Attic that takes out $300,000 a year in profit. They also got $1 million from Bezos, and they're not entitled to any liquor funds or any of this, especially when they paid $166 million out in abuse, sexual abuse. The punishment should have been not only the cash payments that some of the victims received, but also they should be doing this for nothing, for the damage they did to those women and children. So I don't see, and I'm the one who complained that they had arrested there, that was elder abuse, reckless endangerment of the handicap. And they're not good stewards of the money whatsoever. So I really oppose this, and I'm sorry that you continued this giving of the funds without any accountability and punish the neighborhood, especially me. And I'd like to give my $250,000
Thank you.
that you still owe me.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Hopefully there's a question on this documentation of the wrong that you have done.
Thank you, Mr.
consistently.
I don't see any questions for you. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on in our agenda.
Disgraceful, Felix.
So we're now moving on. Thank you, Mr. Oliva. Your time is up. Thank you.
You don't have a question?
No, we don't have any questions.
Felix, don't you have a comment that the neighbor who's heavily impacted negatively,
Mr. Oliva,
there's no guards,
your time is up. Thank you.
you have no security, you have no ethics, Felix.
I don't think we should have to have security here for people to follow the rules, but thank you. Okay, moving on to unfinished business. So before we jump into our packed business agenda, I wanted to spend a moment reflecting on a recent ADN article concerning the suspected 24 deaths of individuals experiencing homelessness in the cold this year. Although we've celebrated several successes in the last year, this article is a somber reminder of the great amount of work we still have to do as a committee, as a municipality, as a homeless prevention response system, and as a greater community. So let's get into some of that work. So first item under unfinished business is a review of the emergency shelter plan implementation with a specific focus on changes and funding for the 2023 emergency shelter plan, specifically the January through April 2023 plan. We're going to begin this discussion talking about funds specifically, then moving on to specifically talking about the Sullivan increase, and then last, want to talk about food, and if there are any other specific or general topics folks want to bring up, it would be appropriate to do so at that time after we're done discussing those three specific topics. So first, let's talk about funding for the plan. So has the administration identified possible funds for the January through April emergency shelter plan?
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, can we see if municipal manager Amy DeFosse is on the line?
As I understand it, she is, yes.
And she will be speaking on this.
Okay, great. Do you try this?
It's 7121 is the last four.
Just so you know, we're trying to get you unmuted right now. Do you not see it?
37 months old, you don't see that? Down.
What is this in front? Yeah, 40.
So the other number is 719.
All right, I think we got you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the LMB director. Courtney Peterson is on the line. She's in here in the room with me, so she can answer any kind of questions that you might have.
Great. Do you need me to repeat the question that I started with, Ms. Peterson?
No, I believe, I think the question was what funding sources have we identified, to utilize for January through April?
Correct.
So at this time, we work, directly with the health department to identify what we could use, to adequately fund, those operations for the 4 months. And right now, we don't have something that's identified for the full 4 months, but what we have identified is the ability to fund 1 month in January from the operational dollars of the Acreage Health Department in 2023, and then after 2022 closes, evaluating any unspent alcohol tax funds that may be available once the year is closed and final invoicing has been done, that can be utilized to cover those costs.
Thank you. Has the health department taken a look at their budget to determine well, I guess first is, what's that dollar figure that the health department's going to be eating out of their operational budget?
I think it's roughly $1 million. It's somewhere just shy of $1 million. I think in total is $3.9 million to run the 3 facilities for the 4 months, so roughly $1 million per month. So that's what the health department has identified, and right now the expectation is that the extension of the contract for the operations of those facilities will be on the 12/20 meeting, and that funding source will be identified for the 1 month of 2023 in the operating budget.
So is your item going to be coming on the addendum for the meeting?
Correct.
Okay, great. So what is the expected impact to the health department with I imagine there is no dedicated fund source in the health department for this. So this would be a de facto $1 million cut to the health department. What's the expected impact on that is the first question. And then second question is, does the administration plan on rectifying the cut in first quarter budget revisions?
At this time, the health department has identified the $1 million that they would be able to cover without immediate service impact, with the expectation that we can evaluate the alcohol tax for the possibility of covering the costs after it's established that the funds are available. So in first quarter, what we would do is evaluate whether or not there was $4 million of unspent alcohol tax remaining that we could then utilize to pay for those 4 months, which would then make the health department whole for the 1 month that they covered in January.
All right, thank you. I'll go ahead and turn it over, see if any of my colleagues have questions. Right, I am not seeing any. I guess, Ms. Peterson, since I have you on the line, there's a little bit of tension around when we can use the unspent 2022 alcohol tax funds. Can you tell me if this is simply municipal policy that we can't use them until accounting goes through its mechanism, or is this part of municipal code?
I would have to defer to the legal department on the code requirement. What I know is that we have legal appropriations that have been done for all of the balance of the alcohol tax funds. And so until we know that those legal obligations are not utilized, so basically until after the end of the year when we get final invoicing from each of the organizations that had obligated funds, we wouldn't know if we had available funds to distribute in other fashions.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Yes, I would like to hear from legal their determination, because as I understand it, right now, we do have several $1 million in unspent and unencumbered 2022 alcohol tax funds, of which a portion could be used for these purposes without negatively impacting any of our departments, including the Anchorage Health Department. So I would like to hear from legal on this. If they're not available now, they can just send us an email. I think that would be helpful. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. 2 things to that. One, I think that the Assembly has had an ongoing conversation about what is an appropriate use of alcohol tax funds. So any appropriation or intended appropriation of those funds really should come through the body before it's identified for a purpose. And then the second is, if in fact we're going to spend general funds for the purpose of this, with the intent to backfill operational funds for the department, that might come into conflict with the language of the tax itself, because the tax says we're not allowed to backfill expenditures that are already appropriated. And so I think that waiting until first quarter might make that scenario really bad. But tackling it before the end of the year might not be so bad, I'm not sure. And so there's a lot to think about in that approach.
Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and do another pause to see if any other members want to get in queue on the funds before we move on to the proposed Sullivan increase. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the proposed Sullivan increase. So can someone from the administration please speak to this request and in particular share some of the rationale behind the request, some of the data that speaks to the request being made, and I think I had also made a request just to get a better sense of in the last several weeks how many folks have been using beds in the Sullivan and how many folks have been using the warming tent in the Sullivan, just so we can get a better scope of the issue.
Just a quick point of information.
Yeah.
I would like us to be careful about using the term warming tent, because what we have come to understand is that it's not a warming tent. What it is they've already expanded by whatever number the services of people inside of the Sullivan Arena. And so I think that our words should huge reality as opposed to create a perception that there's an alternative location. What we're talking about is the 200 people who are in the floor area and then an unspecified number of people who are being served in the wings inside the building. So I'm not sure what the proper term is, but I think it's unfair to the public to continue calling it a warming tent.
Thank you, Mr. Hodgson. So I will attempt to rephrase by saying...
That's not your issue. This is a broader issue. Sorry,
well, that's fine, but you did. So I will attempt to rephrase by saying count the census count in the last few weeks in the bed count, and then any other count on top of the bed count. Thank you.
Through the chair, to Mr. Constant and to Mr. Rivera. So just to give a brief overview of things that are happening at the Sullivan right now, we are serving 200 clients, and what we define as a client is someone who has a bed, who has a bed number assigned to them. They're receiving services, they're receiving meals, they're talking with housing coordinators, they're getting client services. Then in the separate wing, it's the northwest wing of the Sullivan Arena. It is closed off from the other parts of the Sullivan Arena. We have a warming area. We call it a warming area. It's people can access it 24/7. They can come in and out. They are provided snacks, warm beverages, coffee. ACEH has stopped in to do outreach, and they organize a wait list out of that area for a bed. So when a bed becomes available out of the 200, then we have a list of people who are waiting in the wings, literally, to access a bed, a service, a shower, and square meals. So right now we are seeing, let's see, last night it says that 93 people access the warming area. That's in addition to the 200 people that are currently residing in the Sullivan Arena Max Shelter. And so before that, our numbers were heightened. We believe that has to do with snow and cold. The night before that was 133 accessing the warming facility. These numbers are deduplicated, so you don't have people coming and going and getting that head count every single time. Prior to that, 132, 154, 175. I think the max that we saw was 178. So we have an additional group of people experiencing homelessness that are in line waiting for a bed, that want services, that want to be fed meals. And right now we're being limited on our capacity and we're trying to comply with that rationale. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess getting to the broader question here, will the administration be bringing forward a request to increase the number at the Sullivan? If so, what is the number and when will you be bringing that request?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, we did bring a request that we tried to lay on the table at the last assembly meeting, and that request was to increase by 160. It was not laid on the table by the body, and so it's being brought forward on the agenda to increase by 160 again.
Thank you. Again, not to be nitpicky, but I don't think anyone tried to lay that item on the table, including the administration, which they could have. Okay, so that is going to be on our agenda. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm just a little bit confused because, we voted on our emergency shelter, our winter plan for, to shelter or transitionally house specific numbers of unhoused people at specific locations. And in fact, I believe what allowed us to make the increase from 150 to 200 people at the Sullivan Arena was that we had reached capacity elsewhere. And so, if I understand you correctly, Alexis, you're saying that at one point there was 178 people in the warming area at the Sullivan?
Through the chair to Mr. Bowman. So we do warming data in a 24-hour period. So you could have 60 at one time, and then in the next hour, those 60 could have left, and 60 new ones come in. So when you deduplicate, that's how many individual people have access to warming in 24 hours.
Okay, so there was a 24-hour period where you saw 178 people in the warming area.
Correct.
Okay. I think I'm really concerned about, as I've raised now a few times for this bias, and I think that we have another item on the agenda for the meeting today, about overburdening the Sullivan and the neighborhood of Fairview. And I almost don't even, frankly, like the idea at this point of having a warming area at the same location of the Sullivan where we're already sheltering 200 clients. I think that's really unfair. It doesn't seem to me like that was part of our plan going into this. So I want to say that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair to Mr. Boland, that warming facility was in the parking lot of the Sullivan Arena historically prior to this. We offered to bring it inside. It's more cost effective. We were spending tons of money on heating to heat like an outdoor wedding tent. And then the fire marshal was telling us that we absolutely could not have people falling asleep or laying down in that facility because of how it was heated and it was unsprinklered. So in our opinion, the most humane thing to do was to bring it inside. If we don't have a warming facility at that place, we'll need to find additional staffing and dollars to fund a warming facility elsewhere.
Can I ask a follow-up? Have you looked at other locations? Is that something the administration is pursuing?
As of now, we haven't explored other options. The problem that we started facing was that people were showing up to the Sullivan because that is the municipally run facility. And rather than turning people away and saying, hey, you need to go elsewhere, we don't have tons of transportation available. It was in our best interest to bring people inside and to get them warm. As Felix spoke earlier today, or Mr. Rivera spoke earlier today, we had 24 outdoor deaths. It's the administration's point that we're bringing people inside to prevent those deaths.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn over to see if we can get some additional perspective, and then I'll come back to the administration because I think this is a good time for us to get some additional perspective to see if anyone from the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness would like to add some perspective. I think as members know, we did get a letter from the coalition regarding this. So is anyone, there may be someone on the phone who can speak to this?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. If you could introduce yourself to the
Oh, wonderful. This is Sharia Ware with the Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness. I'm the Systems and Improvement Administrator. And can you repeat the question, something that you would like me to address?
Yeah, so I think as you've heard, the administration will be bringing forward their request on the regular agenda to increase the capacity at the Sullivan. And the coalition, in response to the initial request that the administration brought forward at the 11th hour, they sent the Assembly a letter. So I'm wondering if you had a chance to sense that letter. Has your opinion stayed the same? Has it changed? And you just speak a little bit to that.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So yes, since that letter, we have had a wonderful meeting with JHC, Alexis, and Kim Rash, and we have brought our data analyst, Robert Hoffman, and Sonia, our director of programs, to the meeting, so we can have a better understanding of what is happening, because the data is still reflecting that they are that the bed nights, those that are, I guess the assembly goes by seats on the bus. So let's go with the seats on the bus, right? We have 200 seats on the bus that is called the Sullivan bus. On any one given night, and I believe there was, you can even go by the letter that we sent you, at any one given night, there is not 200 people riding that bus in the night. There are, however, as you can see in the letter that we gave some data, there are various amounts of people that have been enrolled, kind of rolling through the Sullivan or rolling through the bus. Maybe they're here on the first and then they don't ride on the second, but they ride on the fifth. Those are what we call enrollment. So still, we're looking at those that are riding on any given night. We have not seen the Sullivan go to 200 or even 95% for majority of the month for November. There was one day that they got to 197, and that was on November 12th. I'm not particularly sure why, why that is. We're doing some cross-referencing with some data to see if we can understand that. So I can say that our conversation, we're still willing to analyze the data, and when it comes to the warming area, that's what we're calling it over here, by the way. I understand why we're not calling it a 10. But when it comes to the warming area, we really want to analyze that data, and we want to do it in a secure way, because I think how we have to, right? But also, we want to make sure that we're accounting for all the people that we're seeing within a 24-hour period. Are they from street outreach projects? Are they trespass? Do they want to go into the shelter? Are they wanting a more non-congregate bed? Where are they in the system? And so, just making sure that we're having everything we need to process that data, but because we do not have that as of today, we don't have that yet. We're not able to analyze that, so therefore we are not able to change our position from the letter we sent last week. I hope that was clear, and if I have questions, please let me know.
Thanks. So I do have a question for you. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you said you're not able to analyze the data. Why not?
We are able to analyze all the data that is currently in the system, but the warning area data is not being captured in HMIS. There are many barriers that we have discussed with the health department, and we are coming to a solution together, collaboratively, to make sure we can get that data in the system soon and in the near future. But until then, we ask for a biannual, so at least that way we can take that Excel document and cross-reference it with the data that's already in HMIS.
Okay, so then I guess to the administration, I think one of the goals that we had as a body when we set forward the emergency shelter plan was to make sure that we did have good data and that all of it was put into HMIS. So it's a little surprising to hear that that might not be actually happening. So can the administration please speak to that?
Yeah, I have Cesar, where are you? With Henning. He is the HMIS expert over there, and he can talk to some of the discrepancies. One of the issues we were having was with sharing information that is privacy protected and how we get that information to ACDH. I'm working with the municipal IT department to try and figure that out. But Cesar can come up and talk about how data is collected, why the discrepancy was there, and how we're moving forward to fix that.
Hello, my name is Cesar Ramirez. I work for Henning Inc., and I'm the system administrator. Just to first start off with, our data is really good. We do have really good data on the shelter side. Technically, the warming area is not part of the 200 individuals that are currently assigned units, which is, again, where we do have excellent data. Our data is at 98%, which is, in my opinion, pretty high, and we strive for an even higher score. But to answer the question about the discrepancies with the shelter count, also first, sorry, I'm not a good public speaker. I've never spoken in public before, so I'm kind of nervous. But our intake process, yes, we're not perfect, and though we do have good data, I will admit that there is a lag in data entry due to our current intake process. Our current intake process, we want to make sure that an individual checks in at least once during the day, whether that be morning or evening, just so that they have a bed for the night. A lot of the individuals check in the morning, and what we do is we hold their beds and hoping that they return for the night, so their beds are accounted for. And if they do not return that night, then they get checked out on the following day. We're hoping that with the new process that we've come up with, that will solve the solution to reflect now that we are at capacity with the individuals that are staying at the Sullivan Arena.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I have one additional question for the administration. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else has follow-ups for you right now. And then I will go to Mr. Cross. So my question for the administration is, so can you help explain one of the other issues that the coalition brought up, which is this idea of possibly not all the beds being used every night? So when you said you have 200 clients for the bed, does that mean that the client has a bed reserved, and whether they use it that night or not, it's still their bed?
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, so clients are asked to check in at least once a day. And so what will happen in some cases is that, Johnny will, and I'll use Johnny's theoretical, but Johnny will come in, he'll check in at 11 and he'll say, hey, I'm coming back tonight. And Johnny will either leave, he'll go to his job, he'll meet up with friends, and then something happens along the way where Johnny doesn't come back to the shelter. And the next morning, when they do bed checks, he's not there, he's checked out of the system. So he didn't stay overnight, but he had told us he was planning to stay overnight. And so at that point, that bed is flipped, his items are stored, and then a new person from the wait list is brought from the warming area down to the floor. Then that person is checked in. If you repeat this with 200 different clients, you'll start to see 2 people not come back. We'll replace 2 new people experiencing homelessness. And so it's a constant evolution. And so there was a lag in data because you don't know until the next day. But those beds are constantly being flipped every single day.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go through the queue, starting with Mr. Cross.
Yeah, thank you. I've been out to Sullivan Arena multiple times, and it really is a fluid problem. I mean, some of the data is never going to be precise or maybe as accurate as we wish we could get it, because the individuals aren't, they're migrants, they come and they go, it's not like they're reporting for work, they're showing up at a spot, they try to reserve a bed, and may or may not use it, then they don't, maybe they're congregating, maybe they go off to another section of the Sullivan Arena, they're not necessarily hanging out next to a bed. You also have individuals that are collecting outside, and I imagine with all the snowfall, it just exacerbates the issue, because you're going to have these surges of people coming in. You have some individuals that are camping outside it, that are happy doing so, and when some leave, they just come in. So, I mean, really, we try to collect as much data as we have, but I think that it'd be a real struggle in order for it to be accurate enough that we can be what we consider to be a perfect or highly efficient system. I think there's just so many variables that complicate it. I mean, it's trying to do, for lack of better knowledge, trying to catch snowflakes in a snowstorm, right? And they're always moving around.
So I guess it just comes down to what do we have for capacity events? And what are we going to do, and now that they're full, what are we going to do next? Okay, we could try to compensate, we could try to get all this extra data on what we need, but really, what I've seen and when I've been out there, it's really hard to quantify, and you're trying to apply the logic to a situation which in a lot of times is not logical. And it creates this bottleneck. So I guess we're at 200 capacity Sullivan Arena, we're trying to get another 160. I understand it. I really wish we had that napkin going right now. Now we can look back at the summer and go, oh my gosh, if we had seen this, we probably would have approached that differently. But I guess what else do we have? Other than Sullivan Arena and increasing capacity, what else is on our plate? I mean, because we're running out of space quick. We've got another snowstorm coming, maybe another one on top of that. That's going to drive all those individuals that are otherwise happy and maybe content being not going to a shelter when the tree is going to drive them in. Our numbers are going to go through the roof even further. So I guess that's the question. Since we don't know how many it's going to be, and it's just going to be a lot. What do we do next? Where are those beds? Where are we going to find them? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
So I don't think there's any way any rational person could argue that the capacity has already been expanded at the Sullivan Arena. I think that anyone who argues otherwise is performing an act of kabuki theater. And the fact that they have expanded the capacity and allowed almost 200 additional people, double the capacity that the Assembly authorized without coming up with an alternative plan, just demonstrates that this was always the plan. And I find the argument that the Assembly was cruel in not voting on this item at the last meeting when the mayor never even got it before us just demonstrates that the inherent cruelty is owned by this administration. Because they have already expanded the capacity, but they have told the people with whom they've given the capacity to, you cannot have a meal, you cannot have a bed, you cannot have services. But the fact is, they're already there. And so that they've put up a false barrier somewhere in a wing of the Sullivan Arena just is a screen of cruelty. And I'm not here to live in a state of denial. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rowland?
Thank you. I agree. I think the administration and Henning, frankly, have already effectively increased capacity of Sullivan by having large numbers in a warming area situation. I really feel like we're being pressured with the Solomon's choice. Either allow us to increase our capacity at the Sullivan, or you're not being compassionate and you're letting people die. And I just don't think that those are the only alternatives. Another question I have is, where's it going to stop? 360? 500? 1,000 people at the Sullivan Arena? And whose job is it to find alternative locations? Did we just stop after the work of the Assembly convened emergency task force? We found the locations and that's it? Do we need to convene another task force? Reconvene the task force? Do that work for the administration? Do we want a scattered site model or not? And that's a question I would ask both the administration and this body, the Assembly. I really, at this point, cannot support increasing capacity of the Sullivan. And especially, I would be very curious when we get further down the agenda to know what has happened with mitigation in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I move on to the queue, just a few things. So first is, to the administration. So you are requesting that we increase the number to 360. Can you just tell me where you get that number from? Like, is there going to be an additional delta if the Assembly approves that 360?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, when we brought forward that weight on the table, the number was roughly between 160 and 180. And so 160 felt like a good number. Now, as of last night, we saw 93. The day before it was 133. The day before it was 154. We know if the highest is 180 or 179, that there's 179 people that need a bed, that need to be fed, that need access to services, and there's not a single point in our city right now where someone can walk in and get a shelter bed. The FS is full, the Aviator is full, the Alex Hotel is full, the Sullivan Arena is full. And now we're faced with an issue of we're denying people who need access to stuff, and we're not approving funding or capacity increase for
I'm going to
it.
ask my question, because I don't think you understood the question. So I'm going to rephrase it. So two things. One is, do you believe that the administration will be asking for an additional increase beyond 360? And two, if the Assembly approves 360, do you think there will be an additional delta of individuals staying in some type of separate wing on top of the 360?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, the administration requested 160 because that was what we felt best at the time. I don't have a crystal ball. I couldn't tell you if 200 more people come out of the woods if they're going to need a warming facility. In my opinion, when we set up this warming facility, we were trying our best to make sure that there wasn't a congregation of 178 people sitting outside of a warming facility or in a warming tent that were already going to be in that neighborhood. I understand through the chair to Mr. Constant that it's unfortunate that this amount of people experiencing homelessness have showed up to the Sullivan. We want to offer them services. We want to offer them food. We want to offer them an entry point into getting into housing. We cannot do that without this capacity increase.
Okay, thanks. So I appreciate the responses. I'm going to ask that your responses, though, just directly answer the questions that are being asked. I think we're getting some extraneous stuff that we don't really want. So, okay, so then the answer is you don't know, and we will have separate wing or warming area if the need arises. I believe were the answers that I heard. Okay, so then my next question is to the task force. The task force has continued to convene. Members may not be aware of that. Sounds like they aren't. So I'm wondering if someone from the task force, whether that's you, Ms. Ware, or another task force representative, can speak to the work that you are doing, and if there's any work that is being done in conjunction or related to this request that we have received from the administration.
Thank you so much. This is Terry O'Leary, again, the Associate Administrator for the Homelessness and Homelessness. The Emergency Shelter Task Force has been continuously. We did meet on Monday, the 12th, to talk about capacity planning and the increased capacity at the Sullivan. Unfortunately, we were not able to come to a consensus or even speak about our recommendation as a task force because we did not have all of the data. There is a special meeting on the 19th, and hopefully by then we will have all of the data to be able to come up with a recommendation from the task force to get the meeting on the 20th. Can I make an additional comment, or do you have a question on that part?
Thanks. So I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding you, Ms. Ware. So can you just repeat, will the task force be providing any additional type of recommendations or thoughts before we deliberate on this on the 20th?
Yeah, can you hear me better now?
You're just muffled, so I don't know if you need to speak farther away from the mic or what it is. I don't know if you're on speakerphone or what's going on.
Okay, is this better?
It's slightly better, yes.
I'm hoping. Okay. Great. No, what I was saying is that the Emergency Shelter Task Force met on Monday and is continuing to meet and will have a special meeting this Monday as soon as we are able to access the warming area data so we can make an informed recommendation if needed. So we are, regardless of the situation with the Sullivan, the Emergency Shelter Task Force is looking at capacity planning throughout our HPRF because we know that there is movement throughout the system. There is movement in shelter night overnight, and that there are solutions that could be made to make sure that shelters are filled to capacity after the cutoff of, let's say, intake. And that requires some planning and conversation, but we do believe that we have some of those recommendations that can be made.
Thanks. And do you have a timeline for when you might be making some of those recommendations?
The task force convenes on Monday, and then we are hoping to make that recommendation if the body agrees by consensus for the assembly by the Tuesday meeting.
Okay, thank you. Great. All right, so I'll go ahead and go back to the queue, see if any members want to speak on this topic before we move to the next one. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I think that while the conversation will turn eventually to the question of mitigation on the agenda, we won't be able to stick around, I believe. I think that probably we have to change the way we approach mitigation and possibly pass an ordinance that establishes when you have a certain number of individuals in a certain place, you have to spend X amount of dollars on mitigation. That slides, because we've come to understand that we're now going to be at least 360, maybe 500 with warming at the Sullivan Arena, and the $400,000 that we appropriated is certainly not enough to manage the impacts of having that many people concentrated in that area. And so I think we're going to have to come up with an alternative plan for how we address mitigation, and we should set it up in a systematic way that just is driven by the census instead of by action of the body. Otherwise, we're going to always get a deficit, and the people of Fairview are always going to pay the tariff that the rest of Anchorage is unwilling to pay.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move us on then to the third topic under the Emergency Shelter Plan Review, which is a discussion on food. So can the administration please speak to when you bring forward an item for funding, what is the food service level that you are expecting with that funding?
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, currently food appropriation is enrolled with the service provider, so Aviator is providing food under their appropriation and Henning is providing food under their appropriation. And so once we get our contract extension into the next year, food will be rolled into that. Right now we're serving 2 meals at the Alex, 2 meals at the Aviator, and 2 meals at the Sullivan, with additional snacks and options for snack lunch if you're leaving.
Thank you. So I will say for my part, I guess 2 things. One is I would like to see the administration, when they bring forward the appropriation, that 2 meals be extended to 3 meals at each of the emergency shelter locations that are being funded by the municipality. And then second thing is I have been hearing that there are issues with food at the various locations in the emergency shelter plan, which leads me to believe that we really do need to ensure adequate funding of 3 meals at each location. The last thing I want to do is keep hearing issues from providers and from individuals about not being able to have food at any of our emergency shelter locations. I think we should do better than that as a municipality. So I guess one of the things that would be helpful is if the administration could provide me with a dollar figure for the food, so that I can amend a higher amount in the appropriation so that we can go from 2 to 3. Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, we were seeing we were being told by the providers at the Aviator, at the Sullivan, and at Alex that, well, especially at the Aviator, that 3 square meals was too much and that we were throwing away food in order to cut down on waste. We went down to 2 meals. We're seeing success with that. As far as hearing chatter about people not being fed, that we had gotten that communication as well. That individual was staying in the warming area and did not have access to food. They were having access to snacks and warm beverages, but I think this plays into my ask of I need additional beds and additional services so that I can provide food to these people. Thank you.
Thanks. And for my part, I'm going to be sticking to 3 meals a day. Okay, so, okay, that's it, unless anyone else wants to chime in on food. All right, not hearing or seeing anyone, then are there any other general topics about the emergency shelter plan implementation folks want to bring up? Okay, not hearing and seeing anyone. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
So I see that the Golden Line is next, but I just want to reiterate that every day we spend focused on shelters, it was housing people.
Thank you. All right, so moving on. So the next 2 topics we're going to be discussing are going to be led by Ms. Demboski, and because she needs to leave the meeting, those 2 topics will be the Golden Lion and the implementation of the Fairview Downtown Mitigation Funding. So Ms. Demboski, if you want to go ahead and speak to those 2 topics.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. I just want to double check that I'm still unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So one of the documents, I forwarded it to all Assembly members today. I know we distributed it to some, but I wanted to make sure everybody got it. We have a robust punch list of items that need to be repaired at the Golden Lion. That was put together by Public Works and M&L. And what it shows is our cursory look of the Golden Lion. It looks like there was about $630,000 worth of work to be done. You'll notice that has a healthy contingency in there of about 40%. Typically, contingencies can range between, normal contingencies generally around 20%. But with this building being as old and as it is, and as vacant as it has been for so many years, they felt like there's some things when they get into it, they don't know what they're going to see, so they asked for a healthier contingency. And they were asking for about 4 months to get everything done. Now, my intent has always been to streamline this as fast as we could, meaning if we can get this done floor by floor, we might be able to bring it online faster. But that was one of the things we're dealing with. Now, a new development has happened this week, which is going to probably change the project scope, the cost, and the timeline. Earlier this week, there was a fire in the Golden Lion Hotel, and luckily it was isolated to 1 room. I haven't gotten the official report from the fire marshal, but it appears it started in a heater unit, potentially in one of the rooms. What we did see is the sprinkler system was able to contain it to 1 location in that property, 1 room. However, the sprinkler system itself, when they were inspecting it after the fire, we have identified some deficiencies. So right now we have M&O crews and sprinkler experts that are looking at the entire fire suppression and alarm system, as well as going through every single room, double checking each of the heater units to make sure that the same potential cause isn't anywhere else in the location. So this is a new development that just happened this week. So as soon as I have more information on that, I don't have any information right now on the extent of the repair that needs to be done to any of the potential electrical the heater units or potentially to the sprinkler system. But we are working with experts to scope that out and to talk that out for you. So that is the update that I have on the Golden Lion for now. Again, I refer members to the email that I sent them this afternoon. There's a ton of information in there. I think it's about 3 pages long. And I'm happy to answer any questions as those come in, but probably my recommendation would be if you have specific questions about specific items on the punch list for repair, that those be directed to Kent Cole-Hayes. He's the Director of Public Works, and he's really the subject matter expert on this one. In addition to the second topic, which is the Fairview, the downtown appropriation that Mr. Golan had successfully gotten into, the $400,000 for security and cleaning around the Sullivan Arena. We have made some progress in that. Law has talked to a PDEA, and right now what we're finding is two things. Number one, we're planning on taking some of that money and appropriating it to the Parks and Rec Department in healthy spaces to do some of the neighborhood, the areas around the Sullivan Arena, and doing some of the cleaning of those community spaces potentially impacted with trash or other types of debris. Then the other is the fact that this way we'll be able to help that neighborhood and fulfill the Assembly's intent. Is we're going to be offering a special overtime detail for APD officers to patrol that area. Then long term, we're happy to have longer discussions. But I have asked the police chief to scope out what that overtime detail would look like, what the cost would look like, and the duration by which he could utilize the portion of budget that's allocated for security. So that is the information that I have that I can share with you today.
Thank you. So if members want to get into the queue on any of those topics, please feel free to do so. So question that I have before I go into the queue. So when do you suspect that we're going to get an appropriation before us on the Golden Lion? You have an initial dollar figure. I understand that might be adjusted based on the recent fire. But do you think you'll be able to bring something to us on the 20th?
Well, that was originally my intent, but now that we have this other issue that has creeped up, we're working feverishly today because our addendum deadline is tomorrow at noon. I'm hopeful that I'll have more information on that. There was a potential opportunity for me to utilize currently appropriated funds within facilities for the Golden Lion, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. So I'm trying to get a good figure on that, and my target has been to try to get that on the agenda or before the Assembly this month. But right now, I'm really just moving. I'm really moving very quickly with our contractors and our staff to scope out what the actual cost is going to be, so we can bring it forward. Again, my hope is to do this in phases and bring each floor online as quickly as I can. But with the recent events of this week, it's just kind of thrown a monkey wrench in here that we have to kind of work through. Thanks.
Definitely appreciate that. There is, a significant issue that happened that might slow it down. But I, as much as possible, want to urge the administration to see if we can get something on the 20th, even if it's something that's laying on the table. Okay, I'll go ahead and turn to Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Amy. I just want to say thank you to you and APD. I think that's an expensive route, but it's probably the route that would make my neighbors most comfortable and most happy, rather than, just a security service that doesn't really deliver having officers out there on overtime. So I think the complimentary question is, because surely that's more expensive, maybe we can have an additional conversation about what the fiscal note on that is, so we can make sure that it's supported, developed and supported, as opposed to, not done fully, because it's a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And I'll just say, my intent initially when I was listening to what the Assembly was trying to get to, we just have to be very respectful of the labor union contract, and having security roving the neighborhood, we get into potential labor issues. But again, if we have the ability and APD has officers that are willing to work overtime to do it, I think we can accommodate at least for a short time until we can kind of work through some of the potential agreements with the union in order to do something that maybe is a little more cost effective, but at the same time still gets to the same goal as would be something intended.
Thank you. Mr. Boland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to thank Ms. Nabowski for moving this forward. I think what you have just summed up for us does sound like a good plan, does meet the intent as far as I'm concerned. I just appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other discussion on these two topics, the update on the Golden Lion and the implementation of mitigation funding? All right, not seeing anyone. Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. So that'll take us to, under new business, the data presentation from ACBH. So as a reminder, and I think getting to a comment that was made earlier in the meeting, one of the things that I'm hoping that this committee will do is, and as I've stated again and again, is get out of emergency mode and begin talking about the real solution, which is having discussions on housing. And I wanted to begin having some of those discussions on housing by taking a look at the data. And I think we're going to start that today, and I think we're going to continue our data discussion in January as we progress with this committee's agenda on housing. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to whoever from the coalition will be presenting on this presentation. And if we can go ahead and put it up as well. And for any members of the public listening or to the recording or listening on the phone, all of these documents that are being presented are on the committee's website. If you just go to meeting.org/assembly and go to the committee page, you'll be able to find us there. All right, who will be speaking? Okay.
Okay, is this audible? Yes, awesome. Okay, hello everyone, my name is Robert Hoffman. I'm the HMS Data Analyst for the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. Can you please move to the second slide? So I'm just going to speak briefly about the gap analysis before Cheria comes back in and talks a little bit more if she needs to about the specific data on the warming shelter versus the solar capacity and the kind of the whole discussion which has preceded us. So the gap analysis is something that we conduct as the lead of the COC, the Continuum of Care, every year. It is both necessary in the sense that it's required by HUD for us to complete, and it is important in the sense that it allows community partners to sort of start from the same base assumptions about what exactly is happening with regards to homelessness, like who exactly is homeless or experiencing homelessness, and what exact needs and vulnerability do we need to actually treat them. We do this, it's a little bit more complicated, but the essential way we do this is by calculating assumptions about what's going on with regards to homelessness and subtracting demand from supply to get the gap. That is, what do we need to do to account for the needs of homeless people in Anchorage. Could you move to the next slide, please? Awesome. So first, like I mentioned, we want to subtract demand from supply to get the gap. How do we calculate demand? The main way that we calculate demand is what's called a Built for Zero by name, so the Built for Zero dashboard. Built for Zero is a live dashboard that we update monthly. It's available on our website. The public can view it. That actually tells you about inflow and outflow and gives a much more accurate count of all aspects of the data, especially the total number of people experiencing homelessness. Like I said, it's live, it's updated monthly, and it's superior to the point in time count, which is often used in gap analysis. We're moving to a more accurate count. So that's how you get the total need. But in addition, if you can move to the next slide, we also want to sort of assess actual vulnerability and dig a little bit deeper into the data. So last year we used ViSPIT app, which spits out a score after a client has been assessed. Vice, but that has been found to be bad for BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, or disabled individuals. So you can calculate your intervention needs based on vulnerability. That is, if you are high vulnerability, you have high needs, and you need to be placed in permanent housing, et cetera, et cetera. So this is similar to the CE assessment, which is a tool that assesses the degree of vulnerability and actually matches them to the services that they need. So all of this gets looped back into the gap assessment, into the individual subpopulations that are as reported in the HMIS. And then you apply that to the total need to calculate the gap. So 2 different mechanisms for calculating demand, but they both end up into the same number. Okay, next slide. So that's demand, this is supply. The main way we calculate supply is with the housing inventory count, but it's not the only thing we use. So you start with the HIC, which is obviously the annual count of shelter and housing available in the community, specifically Anchorage. And then you add in what you know are the new units, that is, units that have come online that aren't accounted for in the HIC. That's like the guest house or other hotel conversions, new permanent shelter. And then you subtract out the non-permanent, non-year-round shelters like family emergency weather shelter, Sullivan, or any shelters that have closed. And the very end, they be true of all the numbers by backstopping them with expertise, talking to people on the ground, making sure what is not being reflected in the data is actually being reflected in the gap analysis. So that's calculating supply. And then the next and final slide that I think I'm presenting on. So this is what, well, there will be numbers in these columns eventually. The top row is demand by community category, the individuals experiencing homelessness, and then the first column is just the total available inventory. The far right column will have the actual gap by inventory type figured out, and that's the gap analysis.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions on the presentation so far? I don't see any. Very thorough, very well done. Thank you. Who is speaking next on the remainder?
Hello, can I be heard?
Oh, actually, sorry, it does look like we have a question before we get to you. Go ahead, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you. What does TAY stand for? Youth and TAY?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Youth and TAY. What's TAY?
It's transition age.
Yeah.
Transition age.
Okay, wonderful.
Go ahead.
Did you call me someone? Wonderful, thank you. So I'm not sure if you want me to continue with the slide presentation because there was a lengthy discussion about Sullivan enrollment versus bed nights here. So if you want me to present on that, then that's fine. I can speak through the data. We did have it here to present to the committee today, and that is the enrollments versus bed nights like we spoke about. And then we also compared it to the other shelters that we have. So for example, the Alex non-congregate shelter is slide 8, and what their bed night or utilization is at their capacity of the Alex, which is almost at 100 every single night of the week. And we understand that because of the fact that it's non-congregate. It's something that we spoke about before to the committee, that there seems to be more of a want, a desire to have non-congregate, just like we talk about the want or desire to have housing, to have a safe place versus a congregate shelter. So as you can see, Alex remains to be almost at capacity every single night, but still not completely there. Then slide 9 talks about enrollment, and we talked about that already, but this is just the data about enrollment at the Alex versus the other one, which is the bed night. And then bringing in the brother Francis capacity, and Alexis kind of alluded to this before, and I believe the Mayor Cross talked about it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we're not moving the slide as fast as you're speaking. So,
I apologize.
So I think we're on the BFS slide, if we can scroll down to that one.
We're on 10, yeah. I can go back if the people in the room need to see those.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go back to slide 8, and then we'll go from there. Thanks.
Great. And let me know also, if you do not want this to be presented on this slide, I mean, I can skip to something else.
No, this is fine, thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, so are we together on slide 8 with the Alice?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so the Alex, this is the data for the month of November. And this is those, we talked about the seats on the bus again. These are the seats that were filled at any given time during that month. And as you can see, it started off kind of low and then ramped up. ACH outreach team has a really great relationship with the Alice and our congregate shelter. And so in daily contact, if there's an empty bed, to try to fill it with someone who's our shelter. I also know, and I think Alexis spoke to, that they're also, communicating between shelters like the Sullivan to make sure the Alice stays full. Do we have questions on this one?
Don't see any questions on this slide.
Thank you, and I do apologize for your background noise. So if we go to slide 9, these are the enrollments. And so this is the same slide, but the different dates. So we're looking at the 12th through the 1st of December through the 12th. Understanding kind of what Cesar was talking about with the 24-hour data lag. So if you're looking at the 12th and the 11th data, because we pulled it on the 13th, I probably wouldn't say the 12th data is the most accurate yet, but definitely the 11th data should be great. And also this slide is bigger, and when I first saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, we dipped a lot, but no, we didn't. It's still the 95 number in that little bell curve. I also want to remind folks that there are double occupancy available in those rooms, and so that might be why they're over the 100 occupancy. The other thing is just data cleanup, and there are, I believe there's a 5-day data quality of when the data needs to be put into HMIS. So anywhere in this last bit of time from the 9th on, we could see that change with our full listing report next week, Tuesday. Okay. Questions for that slide?
I don't see any questions on that slide.
Okay, great. So slide 10, this is the Brother Francis data. So when we were speaking in a shelter leadership meeting with Jennifer Storr, who runs BFS, the Brother Francis Shelter, we talked about how every day she does intake between 12 and 4. At 4 o'clock, she knows that her shelter is full. She has 120 names written down. Then someone, like we talked about in the case of the Sullivan, might not come back to the shelter for various reasons. They found somewhere to stay, could get back from the snow, met with some friends, regardless. So these are the seats on the bus that were full at the Brother Francis Shelter from the 1st through the 30th of November. And one of the things that we spoke about is one of the solutions to maybe making sure that after intake hours are done, because Brother Francis Shelter will tell you that if you call and they know that Johnny isn't coming back, then they will give that to the next person. And so setting up a system in which, maybe Henry Luke is able to call at 11 o'clock and figure out how can we get someone from morning into the empty BFS bed, because BFS thought Johnny was coming back up until a certain point. So those are some other things. Okay, so if we're moving to slide 11, these are the differences, and this is why you're always going to see that enrollments are higher. This is your Brother Francis enrollment, because again, you have the bus of 120 seats, but at any given time, Johnny could have come on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. He could have not come for 3 days. They're not going to discharge him in that 14-day time period, so your enrollment will always be higher, but that does not mean that Johnny stays there every given night in that 14-day period. So this is the difference between enrollment at Brother Francis versus the previous slide 10, which are actually who was a butt in the seat on the bus. On that one. Okay. Slide 12. This is data from our transitional age youth, group K, right? So Covenant House, and this data goes from November 1st all the way until 12/12. Again, remember the 12/12 data, probably not the one we want to look at, but everything else should be complete and already checked. And this is who they've seen in their overflow. This is not those that they are seeing in their regular shelter. This is simply the gym area on any given night. And we do see that steady kind of increase like we thought we had. And slide 13 talks about our family emergency cold weather shelter data. And just as a reminder to everyone, the family emergency cold weather shelter has actually two parts to it. There's a single site that can have up to 24 individuals. What you're seeing on this slide is individuals. These are households that were served. Households have ranged anywhere from 2 to 6 people. So you're not seeing individuals here, you're seeing households. And so I think in the middle on the 16th, there were almost 30 households served in that one single night. Because with the grant that Christian Health Associates received, they are able to purchase hotel rooms by the night for families, so that means no family experiences unsheltered homelessness in Anchorage. So this is what you're seeing is those served at the single site, because the single site has been full since it opened on October 15th, and those that were placed in hotel rooms, even though the single site is full. So no one is being turned away in that program. And this also means that both your other family shelters, i.e. Clare House for women and children, and the kennel shelter for families, either two-parent or single-parent families, are full at this point. Okay.
I have a question from Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we go back a slide, please? Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, where are these transition age youth? Are these, you keeping track of these numbers amongst all the shelters, or is this a specific location? If you mentioned it, I didn't catch it. Thank you.
No, that's perfectly fine. Thank you for the question. To my knowledge, we only have one youth shelter, and that's Covenant House of Alaska, and they received some additional funding to address transition ages 18 through 24 at their site on A Street in their gym. So these are the numbers here, and we are able to pull the data because they are putting the data into HMIS. So this is who stayed in their shelter, or the numbers of people that stayed in their gym, overflow shelter, from November 1st to December 12th.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful.
Don't see any other questions. You can continue.
Okay, great. And this is the last slide. I wanted to do a comparison for extreme outreach. I know we talked about those extreme outreach numbers. I'll just say it here, so maybe I'll get it. I still haven't gotten my jacket if anybody wants to know from our last meeting. But the difference between November and December numbers are pretty amazing as far as the services and the CE assessments and updates that were able to be done when we were able to do this work for an entire month. The pop-ups are twice a week now at Davis and Clinton Park, handing out various hygiene kits and items, making sure those CE assessments are done. And now it's the need that we're hearing about in the Warming area. The outreach team is committed to going and having a pop-up there once a week and working that out with Penny and the health department on what's the best day and time, so that way there can be a hot meal delivered, and also the medics can be there. And then, like right now we're giving away wonderful snow boots. I mean, this is the time for that, but just trying to meet some other needs, but mostly trying to engage to make sure that everyone is on CE as we're moving through this process of getting ready to house people in our housing project. And then, of course, we always present the numbers. This is slide 15, and this, we have one more month, I believe, to present this, unless the Assembly would like, or our committee would like to continue to see these numbers. but the first two, or not first two, yeah, the first number and the last number are those that are on the Vote for Zero dashboard. As you can see, our housing number has increased significantly in the month of October, up to 43. We are seeing engagement and collaboration in many different meetings that ACH convenes and amongst providers on their own. Also with the Landlord Housing Partnership, we expect to see some uptick when their other funds are being released in January also, as we are identifying units coming online in the new year. Are there any questions? That concludes my part of this report.
Great. So I do have a few questions for you. So first two questions, I'm going to try to spit them out and hopefully you will understand what I'm saying. So, I'm wondering as it relates to having a healthy HPRS, a healthy homeless prevention response system, what are best practices when it comes to the percentage of enrollment above capacity? So how much, like if enrollment is 50% above capacity, is that like a red flag that we need to look at our system, there's something wrong in our system, we don't have enough beds? And same sort of counterpoint to that, or rather another way of looking at it, the percentage of client count below capacity, because as I understand it, a healthy HPRS isn't running at 100% capacity in every shelter all the time, right? That's a sign of, as I understand it, an unhealthy HPRS. So if you could just speak to what, as it relates to the data that you presented, what a healthy HPRS should look like.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm not sure if Jessica Parks is there from the AC. I want to give her a chance to speak on that if she would prefer. Is she in the audience? If not, I'll speak.
I'm not seeing anyone in the audience.
Just trying to keep, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm not seeing anyone in the audience stand up to speak,
Okay,
so
great.
go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure I give every person the right chance to follow the right order here. But anyhow, so when we're looking at the HPRs, you're correct. So when we get to about 50%, and this is why we want to look at data monthly. This is not something, and when we talk about the gap analysis, this is not something we should just do annually just to check a box. If we are truly having a healthy and robust HPRS and trying to make a difference in those people that are experiencing homelessness, we need to be looking at this data on a consistent basis, which is why for this meeting, we ran the data again. Even though we ran it last week, we ran it again because there can be changes, ebbs and flows in data quality, people going back and cleaning things up. So once we got to about shelter usage of 50% or even under usage of 50%, we wanted to start having those conversations. Again, we did not know about the utilization because from what we're seeing in HMIS, it is not at 90%. Before, when we talked with the Emergency Shelter Task Force, our agreement was when it reached about 90% is when we should really look at turning on more shelter. I have not seen that in the data yet. Again, still waiting to analyze the warming area data and trying to make sure that we're seeing, what are we seeing? Are we seeing new to homelessness? Are we seeing people not in HMIS? What are we identifying so we can better make that assumption? But yes, we should be looking at this data all of the time at 50%, whether it's even above or below, and then definitely making changes when we're at 90%. Whether that's where does the funding go in changing, or how are we collaborating and moving people throughout the system.
Great, that's really helpful to have those two data points, that 50% and the 90%, as so those are our red flags to really start evaluating the system. Thank you. So I have one last question, then I'll go to the queue. And I don't know, Ms. Ware, if you want to answer this, or if someone else wants to answer this, but if we can go back to slide 6 on the deck. So obviously this is the first presentation that we're going to have on data. We're going to have more information. Do we have any sense of when this slide might be filled, when we might have all the data here? Did you want to address that, Ms. Ware, or did you want someone else to?
Okay, correct. I believe Robert is going to answer that question, and he's in the audience. Well, actually, I'll answer the question. So we were hoping to have that done before the end of the year, but we should have everything filled out and ready to present at the next committee meeting for housing and homelessness.
Okay, wonderful, great. So then, well, yeah, as I alluded to, looking forward to having that second deep dive into the data where we'll go into the specifics results of the gap analysis, which I am excited for. All right, any other discussion on the data presented so far? All right, I'm not seeing anyone. Well, I definitely want to thank you all for the presentation. This has been helpful for me to get a better understanding of the data and the system, and looking forward to the next presentation in January. So that takes us to the last item on our agenda, which is discussion on AO 2017-130S. So for this item on our agenda, this is something that the health department asked to be added on. And so I guess I'll just turn to the health department. If you could please provide your rationale as to why the policy goals of this ordinance should be extended. And for folks who don't remember the ordinance or weren't on the body when this ordinance was approved, this was an ordinance brought forward by Assembly members at the time, Croft and Dyson. And it essentially reduced the number of days needed for notice of camp abatement from 15 days to 10 days. The reason that we're having a discussion on this is that one of the provisions included in that ordinance at the time was a sunset, which was for, was July 1st, 2021. And if there was no further action taken, then this ordinance would be automatically repealed, which I believe does mean that as of July 1st, 2021, we have been operating, or should have been operating, under a 15-day abatement notice. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to the health department if you want to speak to your rationale, and then we'll have a discussion as committee.
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera. So this topic did come up. It was actually brought forward to us by the law department when we started posting abatements post July 1st. And we were told, hey, it's no longer 10, it's sunsetted, you're back to 15. And so the conversation had come up that, you know, it worked well with 10, let's try and go back to it. One of the things that we had seen is that with a 15-day window, shelter space fluctuates, especially in winter like now. 10 days seems to be like the sweet spot. But I'm open to having that discussion with you guys as to if we think 15 or 10 days is best, but we're looking to go back to 10 days. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion from the committee on that? And I guess kick this off. So just make sure I'm reading what you're saying correctly. So does that mean that the administration plans on bringing forward its own ordinance at some point to go back to 10 days?
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, yes, that is correct.
Do you know when the administration will be bringing that forward?
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, I would say right now it's not a main priority. I would say going into the new year, we'll be looking at bringing it forward on the agenda. But as of right now, going into the end of the year, it's a pretty busy season for everyone, so we won't be bringing that forward.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'm not seeing any other discussion on this. I will say, as being one of the members who was on the body when this was debated and in support of the ordinance, I do remember at the time that there was a lot of rationales given that this would make the abatement process and subsequently the process to hopefully get people into the system, into shelter, or into some other housing arrangement more efficient, which was one of the big selling points for the ordinance. at the time. So I guess we'll have this debate when the ordinance comes before us, but since we do have time and this topic is before the committee now, can you just speak in sort of a little bit more detail as to what you think specifically would benefit people experiencing homelessness if we moved back to 10 days from the current 15 days?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, one of the things that I think would benefit from it is we do have heightened outreach right now. Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness received the 1.7, and they have upped their street outreach. I think Taria or Robert can speak to it substantially. We see that outreach is, I send emails, hey, I have an address, can you guys do outreach? Literally the next day, they have somebody on site talking to the person. And I think that's a success. And so when we go back to, hopefully when we go back to a 10-day abatement, we'll have our outreach crews go out and have more touches with the person in less amount of time. And when you have a smaller window, you have a better vision for how much shelter space will be available. 15 days when you post an abatement, you have 15 days between then and the abatement, and so shelter capacity could vary substantially in that amount of time.
Thank you. All right, not seeing any other discussion on this. Thank you for that. So we'll look forward to that ordinance sometime in the new year. All right, so then that completes our new business. I'll move on to Committee of Legislative and Budget Priorities. Is there any discussion under that? I don't have anything. I think we put some good language into the legislative program, and we just passed the budget, so I think we're good on that. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and move on to final audience participation. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak? If so, please come up. You'll have 3 minutes. You already spoke, Mr. Levi.
Felix, is the first one an appearance request and the second one?
No, they're both audience participation. Just one's initial, one's final.
Because I wanted to speak to the union.
Yeah, and just so you know, even though this is tangential, even if you do have an appearance request at a regular Sunday meeting, you can't speak both at appearance request and at final audience participation.
You can't do that?
You can't do that, no. That would be basically double debate. Okay, any member of the public who wishes to speak? You already spoke, you already went through that. All right, seeing and hearing no one, then is there any other committee discussion?
Give me my money.
All right, not seeing and hearing any, then I will call this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.